Hi everyone. So let's go ahead and take a look at section 8 of chapter 19. And this is taking a look at the cardiac cycle. So we're going to introduce the two processes that occur in the cardiac cycle and then look at the 5 main events of the cardiac cycle. And then talk about something called ventricular balance. So let's go ahead and define what cardiac cycle is. The cardiac cycle is going to be all of the events in the heart from the start of one heartbeat to the start of the next heartbeat. And this cardiac cycle does not last very long. It's less than a second, so it's about 0.8 seconds. And what it includes is something called systole and diastole. And I introduced these to you in a couple of videos ago where I talked about how systole is going to be when the heart chambers are contracting, and diastole is going to be whenever the heart chamber is relaxing. So let's take a look at how important pressure change is in the cardiac cycle. So as the heart alternates between this contraction, relaxation of the atria and then the ventricles, we also have to talk about how the pressure changes whenever it is contracting and relaxing. So when it contracts, that actually increases pressure. And then whenever it relaxes, that is going to decrease pressure. This is going to be very important for two main reasons. Because of the fact that this pressure change is going to be responsible for the unidirectional movement of blood through the chambers, which is exactly what we want going on in the heart, is making sure that that blood is going in one direction and one direction only. So the pressure changes are going to allow for that. And how it moves is the fact that blood moves down a pressure gradient. Blood wants to move from a high to low pressure. We'll actually take a look at how most fluids are going to move from a high to a low pressure. So this is kind of a key concept to understand right there. But another reason why pressure changes is going to be so important is the fact that the pressure changes are going to be responsible for opening and closing those heart valves as well, the AV valves and the semilunar valves. So they are making sure, again, that this unidirectional movement happens as well, because whenever you open the door, you're going to allow it to move to one place, but then you have to close one of the doors. Remember, when I talk about doors, I mean valves. But you also have to make sure that the other one is closed because you want it to move in one direction. So the closures are going to make sure that backflow does not occur, but the opening is going to make sure that it flows in a forward motion. So the ventricular activity is one of the most important driving forces in this entire cardiac cycle. And we'll learn that in the next section as well whenever we talk about the importance of this ventricular contraction, because of the fact that, I mean, if you think about it, it really is going in and moving it to either the body or the lungs. And then another thing that you guys will find in this cardiac cycle is that the atria, a lot of the blood from the atria moves from the atria to the ventricles passively. So ventricular contraction is going to cause ventricular pressure to rise. We just talked about that, right? How contraction causes an increase in pressure. And then that's going to be important because of the fact that it's going to push those AV valves closed, and that's going to prevent backflow. And then remember, you have those cords, those chordae tendineae that are going to go in and keep them closed. And also this pressure is going to open up the semilunar valves and help to eject the blood. And then once the ventricles are relaxed, that is going to lower the ventricular pressure. And then what that does is it is going to close the semilunar valves, and then it's going to open the AV valves. So what you guys will do is you're going to go through an animation. You're going to look at another website that is going to be posted right after this one. And it's a nice little animation going through and looking at how the heart is actually contracting, what's happening to the pressure, and what's happening to the valve. So you're going to work your way through the 5 different events of the cardiac cycle. It's going to go through taking a look at what it looks like at the beginning of the cycle, and then it's going to go through atrial contraction and ventricular filling. Make sure you take note of something of these things, end diastolic volume, and there's something called end systolic volume. Make sure you define that first before you get to the animation, because the animation doesn't really go into a lot with the end diastolic volume and end systolic volume, but it does show it on a chart. So make sure you're aware of when this occurs and what exactly it is, so you'll kind of understand what's going on with that. After this, it'll go through isovolumetric contraction, and then it will go through ventricular ejection again. This is going to be the point where you have this end systolic volume. Again, make sure that you define what this is first so you're more familiar with it when you go through the animation. And anything else that you're not familiar with, like maybe the isovolumetric contraction, you might want to define as well. And then the isovolumetric relaxation after that, and then it will go through the atrial relaxation and ventricular filling. Some of the key things that you're going to want to make note of, and it's on a lot of these charts here, you need to make sure you know what's going on with pressures, because remember, blood is going to move because of these pressure differences. So you need to figure out, okay, pressure is different. It's higher in the atria and less in the ventricles. So which way is blood moving? And you know why blood is moving, because it goes from a high to a low pressure. Also make sure you know what the valves are doing as well. Make sure you know if they're open or closed. So those are some of the key things there, is knowing whether the chamber is contracting or relaxing. That's going to tell you whether pressure is rising or falling, and then that's going to help you kind of understand where blood's flowing and what the valves are doing as well. This is a bit of a bit much on a slide, right? But it's actually going through and kind of putting this all together. But you'll have something similar to this in the animation, not as kind of an eyesore. If this kind of scares you because of everything that's on the screen, I don't blame you. But it does go in and talk about how, and it relates it back to the EKG as well. So that's another really good thing about it. One of the key concepts that we need to think about is how the ventricles need to be balanced. Equal amounts of blood are being pumped by the left and the right sides of the heart. It's not like, you know, it goes from the right side and goes to the lungs and it picks up extra blood. No, they are going to pump equal volumes of blood. So remember that the left side of the heart, it has that thicker wall layer, and the reason why, it's because of this fact that that left side of the heart has to pump blood so much further. So that's the reason why it's going to be thicker, and it needs to generate more pressure because of it. So if you have the ejected blood volumes, and if there's not a ventricular balance, if you end up having maybe a backup in one of the chambers, say you have a backup in the right atrium or something like that, that can actually lead to edema. So that's why it's really important for this whole mechanism to make sure that the same amount of blood is being pumped by the left and the right sides at the same amount, or not the same amount, but at the appropriate amount of time. That's what I'm looking for, because if it's not, then serious consequences are going to happen. We'll take a look a little bit more on edema once we get into the circulation. So we'll get into that a little bit later on. So I hope you guys enjoy the animation, and once you see me again, we are going to take a look at this thing called cardiac output. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but we are finally going to talk about what cardiac output is and all of the different things that influence cardiac output. So until next time.